demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success.
You know what, unrelated, but I just was thinking that one thing I didn't ask you about earlier when you were talking about academia was the whole, we were talking about like Marxism and some of that, and you talked about how postmodernism was like born in France and then, you know, kind of worked its way into academia. Have you ever seen that famous video though of the former KGB guy, Yuri Bezmenov, talking about how to inject like Marxism into... No. Okay, Alessi, can we pull this up? I know you've seen it. For people out there, I know a lot of people have seen it, but for those who haven't, we should definitely play this. It's interesting because he kind of play-by-plays how this is going to go down. Is it on?
When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There's no mystery. There's nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place and who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. They will join the links of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom.
Yeah, cut it right.
When a military boot crashes his...
So who is this guy again?
This is a former KGB agent named Yuri Bezmenov.
How'd they get him to talk so openly?
He was a defector. So he was explaining, in this case, how the KGB does ideological subversion. I like how he says that. But I remember episode 43 of Matt Kemenash's first time I saw this clip. He had us pull it up. And when I heard it for the first time, all the patterns made sense. And the reason I wanted to bring it up was because I wanted to ask you, like, you mentioned maybe the postmodernism being born in France or whatever. And, we don't think of France as like, they're a friendly country in a lot of ways. But, when you look at a Russia, or you look at countries that have ideological differences with us, where a China, where, there's things about us that they don't like, obviously, and would like us to hate about ourselves because they want their ideology to win. Do you think that within academia, it's reasonable to say that perhaps the trail of money and some of the funding comes from sources, not necessarily like the KGB, but it could be things like that, to get people to think a certain way, as he put it, over a generation, so that it starts to infect and spread like a cancer?
China, yes. And I'll tell you what I saw at Emerson. With Russia, I don't know how they would be. I believe everything he's saying makes sense. How are they pumping that in, though, given that it did come from France? So I'm curious of that. Let's think about that. But with China, at Emerson, so when I screened in the graduate program, it's different from undergrad, the demographics. I'm not exaggerating. I would estimate 75%, if not 80% of the student body was Chinese, like meaning they had just come over from China to study. And I don't know if that's unique to just Emerson, but I'm telling you what I saw firsthand. Yeah. They have deep business ties with China, where in my third year, they were asking for a student ambassador to go over to China for the meeting, and they have a heavy marketing in China. The dean who hired me to be her personal videographer that I was working for would regularly fly to China each year. The night I screened my feature film, I told Joe about this, but I was in the audience. Almost the entire auditorium was Chinese. Every other movie that screened that night was in Chinese. Only like obviously there was not completely Chinese in the audience, but
yeah, I understand.
The professors, there was a couple. There were numerous classes I enrolled in, showed up. I was not only the only American student, I was the only non-Chinese student. And I would withdraw from those classes, not because it was, for example, one was, I specifically remember, was a directing class. And there were many group projects. I sat for the first class. She laid out the syllabus. I saw all the group projects, and we had to group up. And they were speaking in Chinese. And I was like, how am I going to do this? So I switched classes for that very reason. It just wouldn't have been practical. But so I don't understand how many students are directly from China. I even did a little mini documentary where I would interview them and ask them about that. And they said it was, well, we had the one child policy for a long time and it's very prestigious. Where I come from, the parents want their one child to be able to study at one of these universities. So they do that and then they go back. There were those cries of racism and their claims where there's not enough professors that look like me. I don't have enough classmates that look like me. Okay, if you want that solved, well, when 80% of the students are Chinese, yeah, well, most of them are Chinese. So, so white, we'll just use the term white people. We're definitely not by any means in the graduate program a majority at all, though those protests were coming from undergrads predominantly. But that was very unusual. I was bewildered by that. So they definitely, absolutely have business ties over there.
Yeah. Yeah, I see how when you have an open democracy that, you know, allows protests and allows free speech, which is a part of what the fabric of this country is built on, I see how other nations who hate that can use that against itself. You know, that means they're free to fund things to inject conversation. I always cite this example, but, you know, probably the one benefit of the CCP being communist is that with their kids, for example, they turn off their TikTok at whatever it is, 9 o'clock at night. And their TikTok feed is nature videos and science videos. So they're learning. And then our TikTok feed's 24/7 and it's titty videos.
That course I was talking about with the textbook, it has Marx as the first chapter.
Yeah.
That class, that cultural media studies, was one of those classes, 80% as usual Chinese. I remember the specific day we were talking about policing the internet. And I remember he called on me and I said, well, let's ask, like, one of you guys, do you think that it's possible? Is it how's it working out? Like, what's your experience? Does it work? Because I don't see how we would police the internet, or I forget, like, the government controlling the internet or shutting it down. We were talking about the practicality. I was like, well, how's that working? Like, is it possible? And he goes, whoa, you can't talk about that with them. Like I was, like it was off limits. I was like, what's the point of having a graduate student level course if we can't talk to the students about the reality of what we're examining in the class? So there was a lot of that, like, oh, we can't talk about that, can't insult this. And they often, those students, they will not speak ill of their government because it's deeply
It'll get back
programmed in, and they're afraid for good reason as well.
People tell on them too. I've heard of that before. You know, there's different kids that go to the same college, and then one hears some, they report it back. I mean, it's called what it is. It's 1984 type stuff.
Yeah, I've met people in the wake of getting fired. I was trying to get a startup going, and this guy was like, yeah, we can help with this startup. So I was at his house that week before leading up to, I posted that video from his house. He's married to a Chinese woman. Her parents were visiting, and when not just her parents, like 3 aunts and uncles. I remember sitting there at dinner, and they was talking about how he had been in a re-education camp and had all his property seized and his business seized. And I remember feeling a deep respect for him though, because he was like, had been through it, and you could see it in his eyes. I just can't imagine that. Like, he had been re-educated, and he won't, and no one knows really what would go on, and he won't talk about it, but it was crazy, man. And I was just thinking to myself, why not stay here? But they can't legally, I guess. Like they were just visiting for a while, but it was like, I can't imagine going back to that.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and it's stuff like that when I hear things like that or see some things along those lines. Like, that's when I'm really grateful to live here with all the problems we have. Like, I do think we can solve these things. You know, like if you look at social media, which is the source of the public square that's causing a lot of the division. I mean, let's just be frank about that. You know, we're in 2025. If you view like the dawn of Facebook as the real dawn of Internet 2.0 social media, that's like 06, 07. So effectively, whether you are the 80-year-old grandma on Facebook right now or the 18, 19-year-old on Instagram. Everyone's the same age when it comes to social media. We're all just leaving teenager and headed to college. Now, I don't know about you, but I was a fucking idiot when I was 18. I didn't know shit about the world. And so we've all been playing with this toy of ideology and spreading ideology and opinions and gossip that is social media and is the internet, like babies or pre-adolescents with matches and fucking around. And so society has not had a chance to mature with that yet. Again, regardless of what your age is. Maybe you're older and have more wisdom. Well, when it comes to this, you're 18 years old as well in a lot of ways. And I wonder, as we age, obviously there will be things that transcend social media and, internet 3.0 and 4.0 will change some of the interaction. But that behavior of being able to live behind a keyboard or the phone or whatever the medium is going to be, I wonder if as a society we will be able to mature and deal with that tool better. What do you think?
Get better at using the internet?
Yeah, get better at how we interact with each other on the internet.
I don't know. I think it's maybe if we can get a return to wisdom, like working with that generation.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.